Your cabin is destroying our property values. Paint it beige or I'll destroy you. That's what 15 HOA enforcers screamed at my door at 6 a.m. when I refused their demands. Their president called the cops, claiming I had dangerous weapons. 3 police cars surrounded my lakeside cabin, only to find a fishing rod. This HOA Karen had been terrorizing our neighborhood for years. But she'd made one massive mistake: she never checked the county records. What those old documents revealed about who really owned this place would change absolutely everything. Before you watch full story, comment below where you're watching from. Also subscribe the channel. This cabin had been my sanctuary for 3 years, ever since I inherited it from my grandfather. I spent every weekend restoring its beautiful logs to their original glory. As a land records specialist with 15 years of experience, I thought I'd seen every property dispute imaginable. But nothing prepared me for the war that was about to begin. At 6 a.m. on this peaceful Tuesday morning, the first sign of trouble came not with a knock, but with the ear-splitting shriek of a megaphone that sent my coffee splashing and scared away a family of ducks. "Attention, violator. This is your final warning." The voice was shrill and self-important, carrying the tone of someone who'd given themselves way more authority than any reasonable person should have. I looked outside to see a convoy approaching like a suburban invasion force. A shiny Mercedes led 2 minivans covered in Serenity Lake HOA stickers that could be seen from space. The lead vehicle stopped in a cloud of dust, and out stepped a woman who would soon make me question everything about property law and human decency. She stood there like a general surveying a battlefield. Her hot pink blazer clashed violently with her bottle blonde hair, clutching a fake designer purse that had probably never been within 1,000 miles of France. "Emma Arthur Vance," she bellowed through the megaphone, even though I was close enough to see the coffee stains on her Serenity Lake HOA president badge. "I am Carolyn Preston, and you are in violation of Community Standards Section 17B. Behind her, 5 HOA board members emerged from the vehicles like synchronized swimmers, all wearing matching beige polo shirts and carrying clipboards with grim determination. The largest of them, a sweating man whose vest looked painted on, struggled to carry what appeared to be an entire paint store's color display. His name tag said Chad, and his face said he was already regretting every life choice. He wobbled forward under the weight of a display board showing 50 shades of beige, each slightly different in ways that would only matter to someone with way too much time on their hands. "This," Caroline gestured at my cabin like she was presenting evidence in a murder trial, "is painted in saddle brown #8B4513, when our community standards clearly mandate desert beige #4B3621. She pulled out a laser pointer and began conducting a PowerPoint presentation without the PowerPoint, aiming the red dot at various beige squares with the intensity of a surgeon. "This is desert beige. This is Sahara beige, completely unacceptable. And this abomination is sandstone beige, which might as well be neon pink for all the damage it does to our property values." I set down my coffee carefully and stood up. My flannel shirt and jeans were a stark contrast to their corporate enforcement uniforms. "Miss Preston," I said calmly, "this cabin is made of natural wood. It's not painted at all. It's been treated with protective stain to preserve the original logs from 1852. Her face went through several expressions before settling on horror mixed with disgust. "Not painted. That's even worse. Natural wood is not on our list of 17 approved colors. This is causing severe emotional distress to my emotional support peacock." Without warning, she spun to Chad and barked, "Get the noise meter." Chad dropped the color board with a crash that probably violated several noise ordinances and fumbled in his pockets, eventually producing what looked like a toy from a cereal box. Caroline snatched it and pointed it at my cabin like she was conducting a paranormal investigation. 87 decibels, she shrieked. "The wood creaking is assault. This is damaging the psychological well-being of everyone in a half-mile radius." Just then my neighbor Tom Miller cycled past on his morning ride, his "World's Okayest Dad" t-shirt fluttering in the breeze. He slowed down, took in the scene with the expression of someone who'd stumbled into a circus. "Ma'am," he called out, "that's just wood being wood. You know, like trees, those things that were here before houses." Caroline whirled on him with the fury of 1,000 suns. "Mr. Miller, your house is also non-compliant. I'll be adding you to today's violation list." She pulled out her phone and started live streaming with a dog filter that gave her floppy ears and a black nose. Day 1 of fighting this cabin terrorist. As you can see, this individual refuses to comply with basic community standards. Some people just want to watch property values burn. As she backed up for a better camera angle, still narrating her perceived injustices, She mentioned something that made my blood run cold. Of course, soon this won't matter anyway. She caught herself, glancing at her watch, then at her crew. Did I say that out loud? I meant, soon this won't matter because he'll comply. Yes. The universe chose that moment to deliver some instant karma. Still backing up while filming, Caroline failed to notice the paint can that Chad had left on the ground. Her designer heel caught the edge, sending her stumbling backward in a windmill of arms. The can tipped, splattering beige paint across her knockoff designer shoes in an abstract pattern that Jackson Pollock would have envied. My shoes, she wailed, the dog filter making her look even more ridiculous. This is assault. You trapped me. Chad, document this. Add property damage and attempted murder to his violations. As their convoy retreated in a cloud of dust and indignation, I noticed something else. Pinned to Caroline's blazer was a laminated badge reading, Serenity Shores LLCCO. The name tickled something in my memory from my years of property research, but before I could place it, my phone began buzzing like an angry hornet. I looked at the screen to find 37 missed calls from an unknown number. As I scrolled through them, a text message appeared, just 4 words that made the morning circus seem like a warm-up act. We need to talk. Who was trying to reach me so desperately? Comment your guess below. 3 days after Caroline's paint-splattered retreat, my violation notices were multiplying like rabbits in spring. The morning brought a new stack shoved under my door with enough force to scatter them across my entryway like oversized confetti. 5 separate violations totaling $2,500 in fines, each more creative than the last. Failure to maintain approved aesthetic standards. The acoustic assault via natural wood settling. Creating an attractive nuisance for wildlife. Apparently, the family of ducks that lived near my dock was also violating HOA standards. I was still reading through this masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction when Tom Miller knocked on my door, looking like he'd pedaled here at Olympic speeds. His usually cheerful demeanor had been replaced with something between panic and rage. Arthur, we need to talk. I just got hit with a $1,000 fine because my house is natural wood color, not on their approved list. But that's not the weird part. He glanced over his shoulder nervously. There's been a black SUV parked down by the boat launch for 5 days now. Tinted windows so dark you can't see in, and the license plates are covered with mud. Showed up right after Caroline's visit to your place. Before I could process this information, the sound of engines announced another HOA invasion. Through my window, I watched Caroline's fake Mercedes leading a convoy that included a rust-covered pickup truck with Brad's Consulting Services, hand-painted on the side. The truck backfired twice before shuddering to a stop, and out climbed Brad, Caroline's brother-in-law, clutching an iPhone 6 with more cracks than a dried riverbed. He also carried several rolls of caution tape and what appeared to be a child's toy measuring wheel, missing half its wheel. Caroline marched toward my dock with the determination of someone about to commit a crime and call it justice. Vance, she announced to the lake, the trees, and probably the International Space Station. I've received multiple complaints about your illegal dock structure. It's protruding into federal waters. She gestured dramatically at Brad, who was trying to look professional despite sweat pouring down his face like a waterfall. I've hired an independent aquatic territory consultant to assess this violation. Brad fumbled with his ancient iPhone, opening what I recognized as a free measurement app that kept crashing every time he moved. He started walking down my dock, counting his steps aloud. 1, 3. Wait, did I say 3 or 4? He started over twice before giving up on technology entirely and pulling out a crayon, yes, a crayon, to write on a napkin from what looked like a fast food restaurant. Based on my professional calculations using advanced stepping technology, Brad announced, this dock extends approximately 2.7 inches beyond acceptable boundaries. 2.7 inches into federal waters. Caroline shrieked as if he'd just discovered a nuclear waste dump. This is terrorism. I can feel it. Invading federal property. Everyone, we need to stage a sit-in protest immediately. She turned to the growing crowd of board members. Actually, we'll stand because sitting is for quitters. 20 people filed onto my dock, which began creaking ominously under their combined weight. Tom leaned close and whispered urgently, Arthur, there's more. Yesterday I was walking my dog past Caroline's house and heard her on the phone. She kept saying, make it look legal, and phase 2 is almost ready. I looked at Caroline's jacket and saw the Serenity Shores LLCCO badge pinned prominently next to her HOA president badge. The name was definitely familiar from my property research, but I couldn't place why it set off alarm bells. Meanwhile, Chad had produced a Hello Kitty stamp, an actual Hello Kitty stamp that said, "Approved by Kitty," and was stamping Brad's crayon calculations with pink ink. "There," he wheezed, looking absurdly proud. "Official documentation of the violation." Caroline held up the napkin like it was the Declaration of Independence. "You have 72 hours to remove this illegal protrusion, or we'll be forced to take legal action. This dock is an act of aggression against America." Just then she noticed something that made her face light up with malicious glee. "And another thing. You're charging people to use your dock to access the lake. That's commercial activity in a residential zone." I stared at her in confusion. I've never charged anyone anything. My neighbors use the dock freely. But Caroline was already spinning this into her narrative, addressing her phone camera. "The exploitation must end. This man is running an illegal marina." The crowd on my dock was starting to make the wood groan in protest. Some of the protesters began looking nervous as the planks creaked beneath their feet. "Perhaps we should move the protest to land?" one suggested. But Caroline shut them down. "We stand firm against aquatic tyranny." Just then a support beam let out a crack loud enough to silence everyone. The protesters scattered like startled cats, pushing and shoving to get back to solid ground, leaving Caroline standing alone on the dock, still filming. As Brad bent down to collect his scattered measuring tools, several papers fell from his pocket. The wind caught one and carried it directly to my feet. In the seconds before he scrambled over to snatch it back, I saw the header in bold letters. Phase 2, Complete Takeover, Confidential. Below it I glimpsed words like property acquisition, forced compliance, and most chillingly, final solution for holdouts. Brad grabbed the paper, his face pale despite the heat. "That's nothing. Just my grocery list. Very confidential groceries." "Phase 2 is what?" I called out. "Drop your theory below." The 48-hour countdown ticked away like a bomb in my mind as I descended into my basement at 2 a.m., surrounded by boxes of family documents that hadn't seen daylight in decades. My expertise in land records had always been professional, never personal. But now I was digging through my own history like an archaeologist searching for answers. The musty smell of old paper filled my nostrils as I pulled out box after box, searching for anything that might help me fight Caroline's escalating war. That's when my doorbell rang, an electronic chime that sounded like a fire alarm at this ungodly hour. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the stairs, half expecting to find Caroline with a battering ram. Instead, I found Henderson, the 82-year-old former real estate attorney who lived across the lake. His thick glasses caught the porch light like twin moons, and he clutched a worn leather folder to his chest like a life preserver. "Arthur Vance," his voice was steady despite the hour. "Sorry to disturb you, but I saw that circus at your dock yesterday. Your grandfather told me, if anyone ever tries to take your land, I should bring you these." I invited him in, brewing fresh coffee while he settled into my kitchen chair with obvious relief. The walk had taken more out of him than he'd admit. "I knew your grandfather well," he began, adjusting his glasses with trembling fingers. "Worked with him in the 70s when developers started circling Lake Serenity like vultures. He knew something most folks forgot or never learned, the true history of this lake and the Willow Creek Land Company." He pushed the leather folder across my table with reverence. "He made me promise to keep these safe. Said the day would come when someone would try to steal what rightfully belongs to the Vance family." Inside the folder were documents that made my professional heart race. Original surveys from 1823, deeds with wax seals, corporate charters written in flowing script. These weren't copies, they were originals. The Willow Creek Land Company, Henderson explained, wasn't just some business. It was your great-great-grandfather's empire. When the company dissolved in 1975, there was supposed to be a proper transfer of assets to the county. But there was a clerk fellow named Johnson, who had a habit of misfiling documents that might complicate new development deals. As I spread the papers across my kitchen table, my trained eye authenticated each document while my mind reeled at what I was reading. The original land grants, water rights documentation, surveys showing boundaries, it was all there in fading ink and yellowed paper. Then I found it. The document that changed everything. My coffee went cold as I read and reread the words. "Henderson," I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper, "according to these papers, you don't just own your cabin, son," Henderson finished, his eyes twinkling behind those thick lenses. "The Vance Family Trust owns the entire lake, all 847 acres of water, the lake bed, mineral rights, and every square inch of land within 200 feet of the historical high water mark." He pulled out a surveyor's map that showed the true boundaries and I felt my jaw drop. The HOA's boat ramp, their community beach, the picnic areas they'd built over the years, all of it sat squarely on land that belonged to my family trust. This can't be right, I muttered, but my professional experience told me it was. Every document was legitimate, every seal authentic, every signature properly witnessed. They've been collecting fees for the boat ramp $50 a month from 127 homes for 5 years, Henderson nodded grimly. On your property without permission or legal right. That's theft, plain and simple. Nearly $400,000 they've collected for access to your lake. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Emergency HOA meeting right now. 3am. Caroline has a whiteboard with Operation Hostile Takeover in huge letters. She's talking about removing obstacles permanently. Get here. I showed Henderson the message and his expression darkened. That woman's up to something bigger than paint colors, he said. Take those documents, all of them. And Arthur, your grandfather also said to tell you this. Check the lease dates. Everything expires at the same time for a reason. As I gathered the papers into waterproof folders, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. What leases? The cabin was mine, free and clear. But there was no time to puzzle it out. In the distance, I could hear cars gathering at the community center. Whatever Caroline was planning at 3 a.m. couldn't be good. I'll come as a witness, Henderson said firmly. Lived through enough of these land grabs to know when someone needs backup. We drove to the community center in my truck, the documents safely locked in a fireproof case beside me. Through the windows I could see Caroline at a whiteboard, drawing circles and arrows like a football coach planning plays. The board showed my property circled in red with primary target written above it. Around it were other properties with names and dates, and at the top, in large letters, Serenity Shores Phase 2, Hostile Acquisition. My blood ran cold as I realized this wasn't about paint colors or dock measurements. This was about stealing an entire community. Then my phone rang. Sheriff Brody's name on the caller ID at 3:15 a.m. made my stomach drop. His voice was tense, tired, and thoroughly fed up. Arthur, don't hang up. Caroline Preston just called 911. She's claiming you have some kind of military-grade weapon and you're threatening HOA board members with it. I've got units heading your way, son. Please tell me you don't actually have whatever the hell she's describing. Caroline said I have what? I asked. Wrong answers only, he sighed. The scene at my cabin looked like a low-budget action movie had collided with a community theater production of entitled Neighbors Gone Wild. 3 police cruisers had their lights spinning, painting my natural wood cabin in alternating reds and blues, while an ambulance idled nearby because someone had mentioned potential casualties. Even a SWAT van had initially responded before Sheriff Brody radioed them that the suspected terrorist was the same guy who'd helped him research his grandparents' homestead last summer. Caroline stood in the center of this circus, holding her phone high above her head like she was summoning the social media gods. Her live stream showed 500 viewers and climbing, with comments scrolling by too fast to read. She'd switched from the dog filter to a flower crown that made her look like a demented fairy tale villain. He has military-grade weapons, she wailed to her audience, her waterproof mascara creating perfect streams down her cheeks. Clearly she'd practiced this. I'm a single mother of 3 emotional support cats who need their mother. This terrorist has threatened our entire community. Sheriff Brody stood beside her, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else, including possibly an actual war zone. He'd been 2 months from retirement for the past 3 years, but nights like this made him reconsider staying on the force at all. His deputy, a young officer named Martinez, dutifully took notes while struggling to keep a straight face. The sheriff interrupted Caroline's performance with the patience of a saint facing a particularly trying demon. Ma'am, you specifically reported an AK-47. Our officers have secured the perimeter and found no evidence of automatic weapons. Can you describe exactly what you saw? Caroline's eyes darted around like a cartoon character looking for an escape route before landing on my dock, where my fishing equipment sat in its usual spot. There, she shrieked, pointing dramatically. That military-grade fishing spear. He uses it to threaten innocent residents. He was waving it around like a maniac. The sheriff followed her finger to my 6-foot base rod, the price tag from Bob's Sporting Goods still dangling from the handle. Ma'am, he said in a tone that could freeze helium, that's a fishing pole. It's literally designed to catch fish, not threaten humans. It could impale someone. Caroline insisted, turning back to her live stream audience. He was making stabbing motions. Ask the witnesses. Chat, tell them what you saw. She grabbed Chad, who'd been unsuccessfully trying to hide behind a tree despite his bright yellow safety vest making him visible from space. The poor man looked like he'd rather confess to crimes he didn't commit than continue this charade. I saw him holding it on his dock while looking at the water in a fishing-like manner. I stepped forward from my cabin, keeping my hands visible as instructed, carrying 2 banker's boxes full of documents. Henderson and Tom flanked me like the world's least threatening bodyguards. "Sheriff Brody," I said calmly, "I appreciate you responding, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. I own fishing equipment because I fish. It's a common lake activity. I was checking my lines when Miss Preston apparently decided that made me a terrorist. I set the boxes on my porch table. Actually, while you're here, I'd like to report a case of trespassing, fraud, and theft of services spanning 5 years." The live stream audience was going wild. Comments flew past. "Karen alert. This can't be real. Team cabin guy. Painter beige." Caroline spun to face me, her flower crown filter glitching with the movement. "How dare you turn this around? I'm the victim here. You're destroying our community with your non-compliance and your wooden terrorism." She turned back to the sheriff. "Arrest him. He's probably hiding more weapons. Check for assault fish." "Let me get this straight," Sheriff Brody said, rubbing his temples. "You called 911 to report a man with an automatic weapon, but what you actually saw was a fishing rod?" Caroline's face went through several shades of red. It looked aggressive. The way he was holding it was threatening. I feared for my life. The sheriff pulled out his citation book with the energy of a man signing his own death warrant. "Ma'am, do you understand that filing a false emergency report is a criminal offense?" That's when I decided to drop my bomb. I opened the first banker's box and pulled out the authenticated surveys. "Sheriff, while we're discussing false reports and crimes, I'd like to show you something." I handed him the original deed and survey. "According to these legal documents, authenticated and verified, my family trust doesn't just own this cabin. We own the entire lake, all 847 acres of it, including the land where Miss Preston is currently standing." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the fish jumping in the distance. "Impossible," Caroline screeched, her voice hitting frequencies that probably violated federal communications laws. "This is a public lake. The HOA manages the community resources. I demand to speak to the lake manager." Her face had gone from red to purple to a color that didn't exist in nature. "I am the lake manager," I replied calmly. "Also the owner. And as it turns out, your landlord. You've been collecting fees from residents to use my property without permission. That's theft." The EMT who'd been leaning against the ambulance walked over to check Caroline's vitals as she clutched her chest dramatically. "I'm having a heart attack. This stress is killing me." The EMT, whose name tag read Steve, and whose expression read, "over this," checked her pulse with professional efficiency. "Ma'am, your pulse is 145. That's not a heart attack, that's cardio. Maybe switch to decaf." The live stream comments exploded with laughing emojis and medic burn. Sheriff Brody finished writing the citations and handed them to Caroline with the solemnity of a judge passing sentence. "Miss Preston, you're being cited for misuse of emergency services, filing a false report, and creating a public disturbance. Your court date is in 3 weeks." Caroline stared at the citations in shock. "These are just warnings, right? Like a friendly reminder?" The sheriff's expression could have curdled fresh milk. "No ma'am, these are criminal charges. And if Mr. Vance wants to pursue charges for theft and trespassing, that's his right." Tom had been recording everything and his video title was already forming, "Local Karen Discovers Karma, Lake Edition." The view count was climbing faster than Caroline's blood pressure. As the emergency vehicles prepared to leave, the crowd that had gathered began murmuring, "Wait, he owns the whole lake? We've been paying fees to use his property? The HOA's been stealing from us." The mood was shifting faster than Caroline's facial expressions, and she must have sensed it because she quickly ended her live stream and rushed toward her fake Mercedes. 8 hours later, the video had 5 million views and climbing. I sat at my kitchen table reading through the comments when one caught my eye. It had 47,000 likes. "Anyone else noticed the black SUV in the background? Same one from the Johnson case. If you know, you know." I looked closer at Tom's video and froze. There it was, barely visible in the background, a black SUV with tinted windows. And in the driver's seat, just for a second, I could swear I saw someone taking photos of the crowd. What was the Johnson case? 3 days after Caroline's spectacular law enforcement failure, I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of chaos orchestrated with military precision. Through my bedroom window, I watched in disbelief as dark figures scattered throughout the neighborhood like ninjas who'd failed stealth training, slapping papers on every surface they could find: doors, mailboxes, cars, even the Miller's Garden gnome. Nothing escaped the paper assault. By the time I'd thrown on clothes and reached my front door, the invaders had vanished into the night, leaving behind a neighborhood papered like a bad homecoming prank. By sunrise, Lake Serenity had transformed into Panic Central. The notices, printed on official-looking letterhead with an eagle seal that looked suspiciously like it was copied from Google Images, screamed in bold letters: County seizure notice. This property is designated for eminent domain acquisition. Vacate within 30 days by order of County Planning Department. The typography alone was a crime. Comic Sans mixed with Times New Roman and a design that would make graphic designers weep. But terrified homeowners don't critique fonts when they think they're losing their homes. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. and didn't stop. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to me in years were suddenly calling, texting, emailing, even showing up at my door. Is it real? Can they do this? Where will we go? The fear in their voices was genuine, even if the notices weren't. I grabbed one from my own door and examined it with my professional eye. The county seal was off-center and pixelated. Eminent domain was spelled imminent domain in one paragraph. The signature line contained what looked like a doctor's prescription written during an earthquake. Most damning of all, the contact number's area code was for Detroit, Michigan. And we lived in Oregon. My security cameras, installed after the dock incident, had captured the whole operation in crystal clear detail. The footage showed Chad struggling with boxes of notices, his vest so tight it looked like a sausage casing about to burst. He dropped his phone while posting a notice on my mailbox, and the camera caught him taking a photo of my house and typing Phase 2 initiated at primary target before sending it. But that wasn't the smoking gun. That came when he accidentally hit the wrong button and live-streamed himself for 30 seconds, muttering, "Caroline's going to kill me if I don't get all these up by dawn." I uploaded the security footage to the HOA community group with a simple caption: "Fake notices. Check your cameras. This is fraud." The digital explosion was immediate. Comments flooded in. I knew something was off, the grammar alone should have tipped us off. Is nothing sacred anymore? Chad's phone must be melting from the notifications. Within minutes, Caroline posted, "Emergency meeting now. Conference room. Do not talk to anyone until we meet." The capitalization and panic were palpable even through text. The emergency meeting at the community center was standing room only, with 500 terrified residents clutching their fake notices like they were life preservers on the Titanic. Caroline had traded her pink blazer for black, apparently her serious business costume, and had managed to produce tears that somehow never smudged her waterproof mascara. She stood at the podium like a televised preacher, arms spread wide, voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "We are all victims here," she cried into the microphone, which squealed with feedback as if protesting the lies. "But I will be your voice, your savior. I've been protecting this community for 5 years, and I won't let the government steal our homes." The crowd was eating it up, fear overriding logic like a tsunami over sandcastles. "I've already contacted lawyers," she continued, despite the fact that the only lawyer she knew was her divorce attorney from 2015. "We'll fight this together. But some of you might want to consider selling now before property values tank. I happen to know some investors who might help you escape this nightmare." That's when Tom Miller stood up, his world's okayest dad shirt like a beacon of sanity in a sea of chaos. "Has anyone actually verified these notices?" His voice cut through the panic like a hot knife through butter. "Because I found 3 spelling errors in mine, and the phone number goes to a pizza place in Detroit. I called, they don't even deliver here." A ripple of confusion ran through the crowd as people began examining their notices more carefully. "Also," Tom continued, "why does a government document use Comic Sans font?" Caroline's face went through several expressions before settling on indignant rage. "That's what they want you to think. The government makes these confusing on purpose. Don't be sheep. Be wolves. Scared wolves who need my protection." But the spell was breaking. People were pulling out phones, calling the supposed contact numbers, Googling the officials who'd signed the notices. "This person doesn't exist," someone called out. "The county planning department says they've never heard of this," another added. In the back corner, Chad sat hunched over his phone, his face the color of cottage cheese left in the sun. His conscience, apparently dormant for years, had chosen this moment to wake up and choose violence. In his panic after the meeting, he'd called Caroline from his car, and in his nervous fumbling had accidentally hit record instead of ending the previous call. The 20-minute conversation that followed was a masterclass in self-incrimination. "What do you mean you were caught on camera?" Caroline's recorded voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "I told you to wear the hoodie." Chad's response was barely audible. "I did, but it was too hot with the vest and my wife made me wear the vest and—" "Shut up," Caroline snapped. "Remember who paid your $50,000 gambling debt? Remember who kept your wife from finding out about Vegas? Remember who got you this job when no one else would hire you?" The threat in her voice was unmistakable. The recording continued with Caroline laying out her entire plan like a villain in a bad movie. "Serenity Shores LLC is ready to move. My partners have the funding secured. Once these idiots panic sell, we buy everything for pennies on the dollar, then we flip the entire lake community for millions. Phase 3 is when we foreclose on anyone too stubborn to sell voluntarily." She laughed, a sound like nails on a chalkboard. "That idiot Arthur will be gone in a week. Once everyone blames him for hoarding the lake while they lose their homes, they'll run him out themselves." Chad, driven by guilt and terror of his wife finding out about his gambling, made a decision that would change everything. He saved the recording to 3 different cloud services, emailed it to himself, and then reached out to me with shaking hands. His text was brief but urgent. "Arthur, they know I recorded them. Caroline isn't the only one in this. Check your mailbox now." The line went dead before I could respond, and when I tried calling back, it went straight to voicemail with a message that the mailbox was full. In my mailbox, I found a USB drive wrapped in a note. "Check the lease dates. A friend." What's in the mailbox? Comment your scariest guess. 12 hours before the emergency vote that would grant Caroline sweeping powers to save the community, I found myself under siege in my own home. 20 protesters surrounded my cabin with signs that ranged from the uncreative "Evict Arthur" to the historically questionable "Lake Hitler," a comparison so wildly inappropriate I had to photograph it for potential legal action. My cabin looked like a disaster zone after the overnight vandalism. Boards were nailed across windows, graffiti was spray-painted on grandfather's stonework that had survived since 1920. The protesters, hired through TaskRabbit according to Tom's investigation, chanted slogans they clearly didn't understand while checking their phones for payment confirmation. That's when Tom appeared at my back door like a suburban ninja, gesturing frantically. "They don't know about the old root cellar entrance," he whispered. "My kids found it last summer. Leads right to your garage. We need to go now." Caroline's called another emergency meeting, and if we don't find those original lease documents tonight, she wins everything. We crawled through a tunnel that definitely wasn't up to code, emerging in my garage covered in cobwebs and century-old dust. Tom filled me in as I grabbed my keys. Henderson called. Says he has more boxes in his storage unit, stuff from the Willow Creek company he's been protecting since '75. "Arthur, he mentioned something about leases from 1925, not 1825 like the USB said. But 1925 to 100-year leases." My mind raced as I realized the implications. "That means they expire next month," Tom finished. "Every single one. Henderson says your grandfather knew this day would come." The storage facility was across town, its security lights creating pools of yellow in the darkness. Henderson waited for us at Unit 47, his thick glasses reflecting the lights like an owl's eyes. "Arthur's here," he said simply, producing a key that looked older than any of us. "Your grandfather paid for this unit through 2050. Said someone would come for these eventually." The unit was a treasure trove of filing cabinets, each meticulously labeled by year and property designation. "People forgot the real history," Henderson explained as we loaded boxes. The Willow Creek Land Company offered 100-year leases to railroad workers in 1925, affordable housing for working families, with renewal rights for descendants. But when the company dissolved in '75, the paperwork got lost. He made air quotes around the last word. "Your grandfather suspected foul play. Made sure I kept the originals safe." That's when we heard them, engines approaching fast, tires squealing on the access road. Through the security fence, I saw Caroline's fake Mercedes leading a convoy that included Chad's truck and 2 black SUVs with tinted windows. "Someone tipped them off," Tom muttered, but I was already moving, grabbing the most critical boxes while Henderson clutched a leather-bound ledger like his life depended on it. "Back exit," Henderson said with surprising agility. "Installed it during the Reagan administration. Never trust anyone who drives a Mercedes with a Honda engine." What followed was the most absurd chase scene in storage facility history. Caroline, wearing heels completely unsuitable for running, led her goons through the maze of units while we dodged between them like a geriatric action movie. She kept shouting orders that echoed off the metal doors. Cut them off at Unit 12. No, Unit 21. Where are the numbers? Her team, consisting of Chad and two men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, stumbled around in the dark, running into each other more than actually chasing us. The climax came when Caroline, attempting to take a shortcut, burst through the door of Unit 33 Tom's boat storage. She ran full speed into his maintenance supplies, specifically a shelf holding his paint collection. The crash was spectacular. Cans flew everywhere, and Caroline disappeared in an explosion of colors. When the dust settled, she was on the ground, covered head to toe in paint. But the universe wasn't done with its karma delivery. As she tried to stand, she slipped on a puddle of desert beige, the exact shade she'd been forcing on everyone, and went down again with a splash. Assault, she screamed, looking like a Jackson Pollock painting come to life. Elder abuse. Hate crime. Paint crime. Fashion crime. Her goons stopped to stare at the spectacle, and even Chad couldn't hide his smirk. I'm calling my lawyer. My mother. The President. The United Nations. The Galactic Federation. Chad finally found his spine. Caroline, you literally ran into the paint yourself. We all saw it. This is ridiculous. I'm done. He turned and walked away, leaving Caroline writhing in beige. We escaped while her remaining goons tried to clean her up with boat rags, which only spread the paint around more. Back at Henderson's house, we spread the documents on his dining room table, and that's when I found the smoking gun. The ledger contained every lease from 1925, each carefully recorded in copperplate handwriting. Plot by plot, family by family, all with the same terms. 100 years renewal rights for descendants, expires December 31, 2025. Then I found Plot 47, the Preston property. My hands trembled as I read the original lease. The name wasn't Preston. It was Margaret Walsh, with a note clipped to the back in different handwriting. Walsh entered Federal Witness Protection 1990. New identity, Margaret Preston. Granddaughter Carolyn, age 5, is unaware of circumstances. Property records sealed by federal order. Lease continues under new identity. Henderson peered through his thick glasses. I remember now. Big federal case, organized crime, money laundering through real estate. Margaret testified, got a new life, a new name. Died in 2010 without telling her granddaughter the truth. The implications were staggering. Caroline had built her entire HOA empire on a lie, never knowing she was just a tenant on land she didn't own. Every rule she'd enforced, every fine she'd collected, every family she'd tormented, all while living in a house that wasn't even hers. And in 30 days, every single lease would expire, returning full control to the one person who actually owned the land. Me. The community center was packed beyond fire code violations, with 700 residents crammed into a space meant for 500. The air was thick with coffee breath, anxiety, and Caroline's signature perfume, a scent I had started associating with impending doom. She stood at the podium in her power suit, somehow miraculously clean despite the paint incident 12 hours earlier, preparing to deliver what she clearly believed would be her coronation speech. Behind her, a projection screen displayed, "Saving Our Community from Tyranny" in Comic Sans, because apparently she had learned nothing about font choices. My dear friends and neighbors, Caroline began, her voice dripping with fake sympathy like syrup on burnt pancakes, we have weathered the storm together. The fake notices which I helped expose. The audacity of this woman was breathtaking. The threats to our homes, the chaos certain individuals have created. Her eyes found me in the crowd. But I have found our salvation. Serenity Shores LLC has graciously offered to purchase any homes from those who wish to relocate, protecting you from further upheaval. All we need is to vote me emergency powers to negotiate on behalf of everyone. That was when I made my entrance, flanked by Sheriff Brody, who looked like he would rather be getting a root canal, 2 state attorneys who had driven down from Portland, and Henderson clutching his ledger like a holy relic. The crowd parted with a mixture of hisses and curious stares. Security. Caroline screeched, though the elderly volunteer security guard Bob just shrugged and went back to his crossword puzzle. Remove this terrorist. He is trespassing on HOA property. I walked calmly to the front, setting 3 bankers' boxes on the table with deliberate thuds. Actually, Miss Preston, that would be difficult, since this building, like everything else around here, sits on my land. I pulled out the first set of documents. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you are scared. I know you have been told your homes are in danger. I am here with the truth, a truth that goes back exactly 100 years. The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and Caroline's increasingly rapid breathing. Lies. Caroline shrieked, but I continued calmly. In 1925, the Willow Creek Land Company, owned by my great-grandfather, offered something revolutionary for its time. 100-year leases to the railroad workers who built this community. Your grandparents, your great-grandparents, signed these contracts to create affordable homes for their families. I gestured to Henderson, who opened the ledger with ceremony. Every plot, every family, every agreement, all preserved and protected, waiting for this moment. The crowd erupted with questions. So we don't own our homes? We're just renters. What happens when the leases expire? I raised my hand for silence. You are not renters in the traditional sense. You are leaseholders in a community trust. And yes, those leases expire on December 31st of this year. The panic was palpable, but I pressed on. Which is why I am prepared to offer everyone here, everyone except one person, renewal of their lease at the original terms. No increases, no changes, just the continuation of what your families have had for a century. Caroline laughed, the sound sharp and manic. This is insane. I have been HOA president for 5 years. I own my home. I have the deed right here. She waved a document frantically, but her hands were shaking. Tom Miller stood up from his seat. That's interesting, Caroline, because in 5 years, you have never once shown us an actual deed. Just HOA incorporation papers. Why is that? The crowd murmured, pieces clicking into place for many of them. I pulled out the document that would shatter Caroline's world. Plot 47. Original leaseholder, Margaret Walsh, 1925. But here's where it gets interesting. I looked directly at Caroline, whose face was draining of color. In 1990, Margaret Walsh entered federal witness protection after testifying against the Torino crime family in a major money laundering case. The silence was deafening. She became Margaret Preston, moved here with her 5-year-old granddaughter, and never told that granddaughter the truth about their past or their property status. Caroline's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. That's impossible. My grandmother was a retired teacher from Ohio. She bought this house. But even as she spoke, you could see the memories clicking into place. The lack of family photos before 1990, her grandmother's refusal to discuss the past, the way she had always insisted on paying everything in cash. Your grandmother was brave, I said, not unkindly. She risked everything to do the right thing. But she never told you that this life, this house, was built on a lease that expired yesterday. You have been collecting HOA fees from my tenants, enforcing rules on my land, claiming authority you never had. I gestured to the packed room. And now, every person here needs to know the truth. They are my tenants, not yours. And Caroline, your lease expired yesterday. You are currently trespassing. That was when Chad stood up, pulling out his phone with trembling hands. I can't stay quiet anymore, he announced, his voice cracking. Caroline made me help with those fake notices. She threatened to tell my wife about my gambling debts, threatened my job, threatened everything. But that's not the worst part. He connected his phone to the projection system, replacing Caroline's presentation. The recording played, Caroline's voice filling the room. Once they panic sell to Serenity Shores, we'll flip the entire lake for millions. The HOA was just phase 1. These idiots will thank me while I rob them blind. The crowd's anger turned from me to Caroline like a tide changing direction. That was when the real surprise arrived. The back doors opened, and in walked 2 state police officers, accompanied by what were clearly federal agents. Caroline Preston, the lead agent said, or should I say Carolyn Walsh? We need to discuss your involvement with Serenity Shores LLC, specifically their connections to international money laundering operations. This is discrimination. Caroline screamed as they approached. I'm pregnant. The female agent raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, you live-streamed your menopause journey last month. I have anxiety, PTSD, ADHD, ESPN, NASCAR, HGTV. She was just shouting random acronyms now. I demand a manager. Where's your manager? I want to speak to the CEO of police. As she tried to run in her designer heels, the universe delivered its final joke. Someone had brought in the paint can from the storage facility as evidence. Caroline's heel caught the edge and she went down in a spectacular spread eagle, landing face first in a puddle of desert beige paint. The thud echoed through the hall like thunder. The entire room fell silent, Then Chad delivered the perfect line. That's the third time this week. It's like that paint is following her. They cuffed her while she was still on the ground, paint spreading across her suit like justice itself. I'll give everyone 1-star reviews for the whole lake. My followers will destroy you. I have 10,000 followers. Tom checked his phone. Actually, you have 312. Half are bots. I addressed the stunned crowd. Here's what happens next. Everyone except Plot 47 gets their lease renewed if they want it. Original terms about $200 a month for most properties, locked in for another century. The HOA is dissolved effective immediately. Tom Miller has volunteered to lead a new community organization. And the first rule, everyone can paint their house whatever color they want, except desert beige. That's banned for reasons of community trauma. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Sheriff Brody approached me as the chaos died down. Arthur, we found something interesting in Caroline's house during the search. Turns out Serenity Shores LLC was funding her HOA presidency from the beginning. She was supposed to drive property values down, force people to sell, then they'd swoop in and buy everything cheap. What about the black SUVs? I asked. Private investigators hired by Serenity Shores. They were documenting every property, every family, planning the whole takeover. Caroline wasn't the mastermind, she was just a useful idiot. Henderson, who had been quiet through all this, finally spoke up. Your grandfather would be proud, Arthur. He always said the land would protect itself when the time came. I sat on my dock with my Earl Grey, watching the sunset over Lake Serenity. Caroline was serving 5 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. The lake community had transformed. Plot 47 sat empty, a monument to karma. The house had been reclaimed by the trust and would eventually become a community center. As I reeled in a respectable base, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The voice on the other end was female and nervous. Mr. Vance? I'm calling about Lake Serenity. The real Lake Serenity. Your grandfather didn't tell you everything. I nearly dropped my fishing rod. What do you mean, the real Lake Serenity? There are 12 Lake Serenities across the country. All part of the original Willow Creek Land Company empire. All with leases expiring this year. And Mr. Vance, you own them all. The line went quiet except for the sound of papers rustling. The other 11 communities don't know yet. But they will soon. And when they do, they're going to need your help. Because what happened with Caroline Preston? That was just practice. The real fight is about to begin. She paused, and I could hear the weight of whatever she was about to say. Mr. Vance, your great-great-grandfather didn't just own land. He owned an empire. And now that empire is yours. But there are people who have been planning for this day for decades. They know about the leases, they know about the expiration dates, and they're not going to give up easily. Who is this? I asked, but I already suspected the answer. My name is Sarah Walsh. Margaret Walsh was my grandmother too. Caroline was my cousin. And I've been protecting the other 11 lakes, waiting for this day. Waiting for you. The implications hit me like a tidal wave. 11 more Lake Serenities. 11 more communities. 11 more Caroline Prestons, potentially. Sarah, I said slowly, are you telling me that what just happened here was the smallest battle in a much bigger war? She finished. Mr. Vance, you're not just the owner of one lake. You're the heir to the largest private land trust in American history. And there are people who will kill to take it from you. The sunset suddenly didn't look so peaceful anymore. Meet me tomorrow at the old Willow Creek Company headquarters in Portland. Bring Henderson and those documents. And Arthur, trust no one else. The people we're up against have been planning this for longer than you've been alive. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, then at the peaceful lake that had been the center of so much chaos. Tom was barbecuing with his family on his dock. The Hendersons were playing with their grandkids in the shallow water. Everything looked normal, peaceful. But now I knew the truth. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The next morning, Henderson and I drove to Portland in silence, the banker's boxes of documents secured in the truck bed. The Willow Creek Company headquarters turned out to be a modest 3-story building in the Pearl District, with Walsh and Associates, Legal Services, on the directory. Sarah Walsh was nothing like her cousin Caroline. Where Caroline had been loud and theatrical, Sarah was quiet and precise. Mid-30s, wearing a simple blue dress and glasses, she looked more like a librarian than someone who'd been protecting a multi-billion-dollar secret. Her office was lined with maps, filing cabinets, and what appeared to be surveillance photos of various lake communities. Sit down, she said without preamble. We don't have much time. My phone's been ringing all morning. The other HOA presidents are starting to ask questions. She spread a large map across her desk. 12 red dots marked locations across the United States: Washington, Oregon, California, Colorado, Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Vermont. Your great-great-grandfather Ezra Vance was more ambitious than anyone realized, Sarah began. He didn't just buy land, he bought strategic water rights across the northern United States. Each lake was designed to be self-sufficient, with 100-year leases to create stable communities. She pointed to each red dot. Lake Serenity, Oregon, that's you. Lake Tranquil in Washington, 400 families. Lake Harmony in Colorado, 600 families. And so on. In total, we're talking about 8,000 families across 12 states. Henderson leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. That's millions of acres. Billions in current property value, Sarah nodded. And all of it legally yours, Arthur. But here's the problem. She pulled out a thick folder labeled, Hostile Acquisitions 2024 to 2025. Every single one of these communities has had the same problems you experienced. Tyrannical HOA presidents, mysterious property developers, fake emergency situations. It's all coordinated. I stared at the photos she was showing me. 12 different people, but they all had the same look as Caroline, that mix of entitlement and desperation. They're all connected to something called the Northern Development Consortium, Sarah continued. A shell company that's been buying up properties around each lake for the past 5 years. They knew about the lease expirations. They've been planning this coordinated takeover. How did you know about all this? I asked. Sarah's expression darkened. Because my grandmother Margaret wasn't just in witness protection for testifying against the Torino family. She was protecting something else, the master copy of all the lease agreements. When she died, she left me everything, including a letter explaining that Caroline had been recruited by these people when she was 18. She handed me a photograph. It showed a young Caroline shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit outside a bank. Caroline thought she was getting a job as an HOA manager. She didn't know she was being groomed to steal an empire. That's when Sarah's phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and went pale. It's Lake Tranquil, she said, putting it on speaker. The voice was panicked, male, probably elderly. Sarah, you have to help us. Our HOA president just called an emergency meeting. She's saying the government is seizing all our properties. People are panicking, they're talking about selling to some development company. Sarah and I exchanged looks. What was happening? How long ago? Sarah asked. 20 minutes. The meeting's in an hour. Sarah, she's got the same papers Caroline had. Word for word. Sarah was already grabbing her keys. Arthur, we need to go. Now. If Lake Tranquil falls, they'll all fall like dominoes. These people have been coordinating this for months. As we rushed out of the building, my phone started buzzing. Text after text from unknown numbers. Lake Harmony, emergency, need help now. Lake Peaceful, Minnesota, gone crazy, please respond. Lake Bliss, Pennsylvania, government seizure notices, help. It was happening everywhere at once. We drove north toward Washington at speeds that would have made Sheriff Brody write very expensive tickets. Sarah was on her phone constantly, trying to coordinate with contacts at each lake. It's coordinated, she said, hanging up from her 5th call. All 12 HOA presidents called emergency meetings at exactly the same time. They're all using the same fake government documents, the same panic tactics. How is that even possible? Henderson asked from the back seat. Years of planning, Sarah replied grimly. They installed their people as HOA presidents across all 12 communities. Caroline wasn't special, she was just one of 12 puppets. My phone rang. Sheriff Brody. Arthur, I thought you should know. We just got a call from the FBI. Serenity Shores LLC is connected to a massive real estate fraud investigation. They think you might be in danger. What kind of danger? The kind where people have been known to have accidents when they don't cooperate with land transfers. I looked at Sarah, who had been listening. She nodded grimly. Sheriff, I said, can you contact the FBI? Tell them we're dealing with a coordinated attack on 12 properties across the United States. They need to move fast. We arrived at Lake Tranquil just as the emergency meeting was starting. The community center was smaller than ours, but just as packed with terrified residents. At the podium stood a woman who could have been Caroline's twin, same blonde hair, same power suit, same fake tears streaming down her face. My dear neighbors, she was saying, I've tried to protect us, but the government has made their decision. We have 48 hours to evacuate or face federal charges. She held up the same fake documents Caroline had used. Even the typography was identical. Fortunately, I found a company willing to buy our homes quickly, before the government seizes them for nothing. Sarah and I burst through the doors carrying our boxes of real documents. That's a lie. Sarah shouted, her voice cutting through the hysteria. Those documents are fake. I can prove it. The blonde woman, her name tag read President Jennifer Walsh, another Walsh but clearly no relation, spun around with fury in her eyes. Security? Remove these troublemakers. They're working with the government. But Sarah was already at the microphone. Everyone look at your documents. Comic Sans font. Misspelled words. Phone numbers that go to pizza places. The crowd began examining their papers more carefully, and the same confusion that had broken Caroline's spell began spreading through this room. I stepped forward with the banker's boxes. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Arthur Vance. I am the legal owner of this lake and all the land around it. Your families have been my tenants for 100 years under renewable leases. Those leases expired on December 31st, and I am here to offer you renewal at the original terms. Jennifer Walsh's face went through the same color changes Caroline's had. Impossible. I have the deeds. I am the HOA president. Actually, Sarah said, pulling out a document, you're Jennifer Walsh, hired by Northern Development Consortium in 2019. You've never owned property here. Just like Caroline Preston in Oregon. Over the next 72 hours, Sarah and I traveled to all 12 lake communities. At each one we found the same pattern. Fake government seizure notices. Panicked emergency meetings. HOA presidents pushing immediate sales to helpful development companies. Terrified residents ready to sell for pennies on the dollar. But we also found something else. Once people learned the truth, they were furious. The real community leaders, the families who had lived on these lakes for generations, rallied together. At Lake Harmony in Colorado, a 90-year-old veteran named Frank Miller, no relation to our Tom, stood up during the emergency meeting and said, I fought in Korea so my family could have a home. I'll be damned if I let some fake HOA president steal it now. At Lake Peaceful in Minnesota, the entire high school hockey team showed up to the meeting wearing t-shirts that said, Our Lake, Our Choice. By the end of the week, all 12 fake HOA presidents had been arrested. The Northern Development Consortium was under federal investigation. And 8,000 families across 12 states learned they were part of the largest community land trust in American history. 6 months later, I sat on my dock again, but this time I wasn't alone. Sarah had moved to Lake Serenity to help coordinate the 12-Lake Trust. Henderson had been appointed as the official historian. Tom Miller had become the elected representative for Oregon, and similar representatives had been chosen for each of the other 11 lakes. We'd established the Willow Creek Community Trust, managed by the residents themselves, with lease renewals guaranteed for anyone who wanted them. Property values had actually increased once people realized they were part of something historically significant. The fake HOA presidents were all serving prison sentences. Caroline got the longest, 8 years, because of her additional fraud charges. The last I heard, she was still claiming her emotional support peacock was being denied proper accommodation. You know what the best part is? Sarah said, sitting beside me with her own cup of coffee. What's that? Your great-great-grandfather's business plan actually worked. He wanted to create affordable, permanent housing for working families. 100 years later, that's exactly what we have. I looked out over the lake, where families were enjoying their evening activities. Kids were swimming, adults were barbecuing, elderly couples were taking sunset walks. Think there are any more surprises waiting for us? I asked. Sarah grinned. Actually, about that. She pulled out a letter from her purse. This came in yesterday's mail. It's from a law firm in Alaska. I groaned. Please tell me there's not a 13th lake. No, she said, handing me the letter. But apparently your great-great-grandfather also owned mineral rights to half the Alaskan wilderness. And those leases expire next year. I stared at the letter, then at Sarah, then at the peaceful lake that had started this whole adventure. You know what? I said finally. Let someone else deal with Alaska. I'm perfectly happy being the protector of 12 lakes and 8,000 families. Sarah laughed. That's exactly what your grandfather said about the lakes. He told Henderson, let Arthur worry about that when the time comes. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear Tom's kids playing, Henderson telling stories to his grandchildren, and the gentle sound of water lapping against my dock. For the first time in months, everything was perfect. Well, almost everything. Because tomorrow, I had a video call scheduled with all 12 lake communities to discuss our first annual Defeat Your Local Karen Day celebration. And knowing this group, it was going to be absolutely spectacular. But that's a story for another day. Comment below with your favorite moment. And don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable true stories.